Good evening, everyone. It's Dr. McCoy, and it's time for our Thursday gathering. We gather on Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I am delighted that you are here. We are walking through the Gospel according to Luke, the book of Luke, but I'm going to focus on Dr. King on this evening, and we'll get back to Luke, okay? So if you're joining a little later after Thursday, that's okay. If you're joining after 7 p.m., that's okay too. I'm just simply glad that you're here because I believe that in 2025, we can learn lessons from the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in particular, leadership lessons. And so I wanted to read to you some of the report information from Pew Research Center. This research really was gained back in August 2023. And they discovered that in 2023, about 8 in 10 American adults, that's 81%, said that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had a positive impact on the United States of America. So in their own words, Americans had a lot to say about Dr. King's legacy. I'm going to read to you just a few selected written responses to an open-ended question. So they divided people into like political affiliation and what we know as the social construct of race. We know there's only one race, human race, but there's this social construct where people call folks black and white and Asian and all these other kinds of things, brown people or whatever. But the first person, Black Democrat, is labeled as a Black Democrat. This person says he wanted equality for all people, not just for blacks. He wanted all poor people to have a better life in this country. He was against the war in Vietnam. He fought for voters' rights. He loved all people in this country. Then another Democrat, labeled as white Democrat, said at the time he was a radical, hated by a majority of white folks. He advocated for equality, not just in racial acceptance, but by changing the economic system to uplift the poor. And then another person labeled as an Asian Democrat. MLK Jr. was remembered for civil disobedience and peaceful protests, but people often forget he was a radical and was not some quiet pastor. He was a man of the people, and he was killed for advocating for human rights. And then we move on to where they label people as Republican. And here's a Black Republican. He didn't only want equality for Black people, he advocated for all. He also wanted to tear down he also did not tear down white people to make his point. He knew and said that it took their involvement for change as well. And then this person is labeled as a white Republican. MLK Jr. pushed for equality among all people, regardless of skin color, not because of skin color. He did not intend for the outcome of his fight to be an emphasis on race, as we are seeing today, but rather he sought a world in which race is irrelevant. And then lastly, this person is also labeled as a Republican, Hispanic Republican. He tried to get both Black and white people and other colors to get along because we're not different races, rather one race, the human race. Sadly, I think only some people understand that and live it. Others try to use race as a tool to divide us. So Americans have a lot to say, huh? What would you say if someone were to ask you, what do you think about the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? You don't have to answer that, but I want you to just think about that because you may not be the keynote speaker for the event that you attend or something like that. But what you think does matter. So I want you to think about that as we consider celebrating the life and legacy of Dr. King. So then there are at least 3 leadership lessons from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that I think that as we celebrate his legacy and we reflect on his life, it's important to know that while he's most known by many as a civil rights activist, his philosophy can be applied to a number of domains like leadership. And so there's one presentation, for example, where a writer wanted to explore one of these domains by highlighting 3 key leadership lessons from Dr. King. So I'm going to share those 3 lessons with you. The first one is, when we consider the leadership of Dr. King, he engaged others. Dr. King engaged others. So a large part of his success was due to the fact that he was able to really communicate in a great way and to gain commitment of others for the cause. It wasn't something that was done in a vacuum. So it's critical because, no change can really be created or even sustained in a vacuum. It takes many people, it takes a team effort to get something done. So then we may raise a question, well, how is that done? Well, if you're a leader, you have to consider your interactions with people, that they be effective interactions and that you really engage people who lead outside of your context, like community leaders. If you're not a community leader, are you engaging community leaders? If you're not a faith leader, are you engaging faith leaders? If you're not a leader in corporate America, are you engaging leaders in corporate America? So it was very important to Dr. King to gain and solicit feedback from various people. And he took into account the opinions in his practices. So the opinions of others. So if you're only listening to the echo of your own voice, you have to really check your leadership. Really check it, because it's important to engage others. The second thing, number 2, Dr. King embraced discomfort. So when thinking about leadership during the civil rights movement, it was not uncommon for Dr. King and others to be subjected to both verbal and physical attacks. And sometimes those attacks led to serious injury or worse. And so leading a movement such as the civil rights movement, especially during a time when, it was really dangerous to be vocal in that way, it took an immense amount of bravery. It took an immense amount of courage, and it took an immense amount of comfort with discomfort. Comfort with discomfort. So there were all of these attacks, and, there were things that were said that, could have and did traumatize those persons who were aiming towards freedom. And Dr. King really talked about even some of the fear as a leader. For a matter of fact, let me not just tell you that. Let me share something from this book. This book is Stride Towards Freedom. This is the Montgomery story. Let me say it in Dr. King's own words, okay? I'm talking right now about embracing discomfort. Listen to what he says in the chapter entitled The Violence of Desperate Men. So he says that there were incidents that started, and he took them in stride, feeling that they were the work of a few hotheads who would soon be discouraged. Thinking about discomfort, these people would soon be discouraged when they discovered that they would not fight back. We would not fight back. But as the weeks passed, he says, I began to see that many of the threats were in earnest. Soon I felt myself faltering and growing in fear. One day, a white friend told me that he had heard from reliable sources that there were plans being made to take my life. For the first time, I realized that something could happen to me. Talking about embrace discomfort. One night in a mass meeting, I found myself saying, if one day you find me sprawled out dead, I do not want you to retaliate with a single act of violence. I urge you to continue protesting with the same dignity and discipline you have shown so far. A strange silence came over the audience. Afterward, to the anxious group that gathered around, I tried to make light of the incident by saying that my words had not grown from a specific cause, but were just a general statement of principle that should guide our actions in the event of any fatality. But Ralph Abernathy was not satisfied. As he drove me home that night, he said, something is wrong. You are disturbed about something. I tried to evade the issue by repeating what I had just told the group at the church, but he persisted. Martin, he said, you were not talking about some general principle you had. You had something specific in mind. Unable to evade any longer, I admitted the truth. For the first time, I told him about the threats that were harassing my family. I told him about the conversation with my white friend. I told him about the fears that were creeping up on my soul. Ralph tried to reassure me, but I was still afraid. Embracing discomfort in leadership. The threats continued almost every day. Someone warned me that he had overheard white men making plans to get rid of me. Almost every night I went to bed faced with the uncertainty of the next moment. In the morning, I would look at Coretta and say to myself, they can be taken away from me at any moment. I can be taken away from them at any moment. For once, I did not even share my thoughts with Coretta. One night toward the end of January 1st, or the end of January, I settled into bed late after a strenuous day. Coretta had already fallen asleep, and just as I was about to doze off, the telephone rang. An angry voice. Listen, Nick, the N-word. We've taken all we want from you. Before next week, you'll be sorry you ever came to Montgomery. I hung up, but I couldn't sleep. It seemed that all the fears had come down on me at once. I had reached the saturation point. I got out of bed and began to walk the floor. Finally, I went to the kitchen and heated a pot of coffee. I was ready to give up. Talking about embrace discomfort as a leader. I was ready to give up. With my cup of coffee sitting untouched before me, I tried to think of a way to move out of the picture without appearing a coward. In this state of exhaustion, when my courage had all but gone, I decided to take my problem to God. With my head in my hands, I bowed over the kitchen table and prayed aloud. The words I spoke to God that midnight are still vivid in my memory. I am here taking a stand for what I believe is right, but now I am afraid. The people are looking to me for leadership. And if I stand before them without strength and courage, they too will falter. I am at the end of my powers. I have nothing left. I've come to the point where I can't face it alone. At that moment, here comes the embracing discomfort. At that moment, I experienced the presence of the divine as I had never experienced him before. It seemed as though I could hear the quiet assurance of an inner voice saying, stand up for righteousness, stand up for truth, and God will be at your side forever. Almost at once, my fears began to go. My uncertainty disappeared. I was ready to face anything. Stride toward freedom. The Montgomery story. I love this book. So I had to read that to you so that you could hear Dr. King's own words. Even in that moment of this book, he shares with us what embracing discomfort looks like. Yes. So that is indeed number 2. So he wrote, even in Birmingham jail letter, he wrote, I have earnestly worked and preached against violent tension, but there is a type of constructive, nonviolent tension that is necessary for growth. So be nonviolent, move forward, embrace discomfort. So again, number 1, engage others. Number 2, embrace discomfort. And lastly, lead with character. Lead with character. I think many of us know that beyond everything else, maintaining authenticity with your values and leading with character is one of the most crucial elements of successful leadership. We can take all these classes. You can do like me and go get a PhD in leadership. But at the end of the day, regardless of the letters behind your name, regardless of the title that you either earn or someone just gives it to you, we have to remember that it was Dr. King in his renowned I Have a Dream speech who noted, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they are not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of there you go, character. So let us remember that character is something that was really important to Dr. King as he regularly strove to live by his core values. So in leadership, we have to ask ourselves, first of all, what are our values? And then secondly, are we living by that which we claim to value? It's really important. So I hope that we can really reflect on Dr. King's legacy this week, and beyond, even on Monday as well. I hope that we can focus on Dr. King's legacy, and we can consider how it affects us, and we can seek to apply even these philosophies of leadership into our own practice. So I do wish you the best. I encourage you, if you don't have, make sure you have at least one King book. If you don't have the book, make sure you can Google Birmingham jail letter, and just remind yourself of some of the words of Dr. King. And in those moments that speak to you, ask yourself, how can I apply this to my daily life? We're not looking at everybody else right now, but ourselves. So what does it look like when I engage others? What does it look like when I embrace discomfort? And what does it look like when I consider my character and who I am and who I'm becoming? Because everyone is becoming. All right. So I want you to have a great King Day. I want you to continue to lead in excellence. And like we all need to do, we need to work on ourselves. So we'll keep doing that. Okay. All right. Have a great King celebration. God bless you and good evening to you.